Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Michael Paradise, a leadership development expert from AdventHealth's Leadership Institute. In this episode, Michael shares powerful insights on what makes a great leader, the importance of executive presence, and how to develop communication skills that drive success. We'll explore how leaders can foster trust, navigate change, and inspire their teams. If you're looking to refine your leadership style and become a more impactful communicator, you won't want to miss this episode. Let's dive in. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
My pleasure. Looking forward to our conversation. Before we get too far into things, why don't you maybe tell the listeners just a little bit about you, your career journey, and the great work that you're doing today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Michael Paradise. I work in the Leadership Institute at AdventHealth. We're a healthcare organization that values leadership so much that my position and my team exist just to provide leadership development to our 100,000 team members and about 9,000 leaders in the organization. I have a history of pastoral ministry, teaching at the collegiate level, and leadership development as well.
Outstanding. Yeah, I just know from the interactions we've had in the past and the work that I've done with your team, fantastic organization and truly just lives and breathes that leadership and servant culture. So it's just so great to have you here today. And what kind of got you down this path of leadership and leadership development?
My passion for leadership development, I could trace it back to a point in time, my freshman year of college, when I worked for a wonderful leader on campus who was a campus chaplain providing ministry to a small Christian college. He took our org chart and flipped it upside down and said, "I'm here to support you. Your ideas are what run this place. Your ideas are what we're going to go with. And I'm here to empower you just as you're here to empower others." And just that one moment shook things up for me, set me down a course for a passion in leadership development. And that has taken me all the way to earning a doctoral degree in organizational leadership.
Wow, it's pretty rare when somebody can pinpoint the exact moment that it happens. It's so cool to hear that. And I just absolutely love that philosophy that as a leader, it's not about you, right? You are here to serve the people on your team, not the other way around. And I think a lot of people miss the mark on that. I've definitely had leaders that had that philosophy that it's all about them. And I've had the fortune to have some fantastic leaders throughout my career where they got that, like their job, that true servant leadership. They are there to help you to be successful and to equip you with the tools and strategies in order to do so.
Absolutely. In fact, I ran into a couple nurse managers recently in our organization that were having some struggles in their own leadership journey. They were brand new leaders. And these two literally said, "We thought that when we became managers, that was going to solve all the problems because then everybody would just listen to us." And of course, we know that as leaders, the only challenge is, people listen to you and they do what you say without any question. These two were struggling because of that.
So as I think about leadership, a big part of that is communication. And I believe in order to be a truly effective leader, you have to have strong communication skills. So when you hear the term strong communication skills or that somebody's a great communicator, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
The first thing that comes to mind is a person's ability to present to a group. I think my favorite term for the style of a leader who communicates well is called non-anxious presence. And I think when a leader shows up with a non-anxious presence, they're communicating to their team that, and to whoever surrounds them, that although we may face some challenges, we're going to be okay. Maybe we have the answers, maybe we don't, but I have the emotional intelligence to demonstrate that our team is going to be strong when faced with challenges or with experiencing successes. And I'm not going to be absolutely shaken or rocked by having to give a presentation, having to deliver some, constructive feedback, anything along those lines. A non-anxious presence, I think, is key.
Especially in turbulent times. If I think maybe the past several years with all the changes organizations were going through and just kind of the chaos that was going on, I can only imagine in your line of work with a healthcare organization, but to have a non-anxious leader, somebody that is that calm, steady force is priceless in those types of scenarios. And one of the things that you hit on there is this idea, I think, of authenticity, honesty, and transparency. As the leader, you don't have to have the answers all the time. It's okay to say, you know what? It's not fully baked right now, but here's where we're going. Here's that North Star, what we're working towards. We'll fill in some of the blanks along the way, rather than I think trying to put on that facade that everything's okay, everything's perfect. People can see right through that. And that anxiety is going to, I think, bleed through a little bit when you're not being authentic and you're not being fully transparent with your team.
Yeah, people sniff that out quickly, don't they? And I know I'll just say for me, I have the tendency to want to make it up as I go,
Mhm.
and the tendency to pretend everything is okay. I recognize that I have that tendency.
Mhm.
When I have to deliver some news, if we're communicating a change to my team, I know that one of the things on my mind is that I have to be open to other perspectives, and I have to be cognizant of thinking through when we do have an answer and when we don't have an answer, when we don't yet have an answer, and how to communicate that.
Mhm.
That awareness is important for me because I know I have the tendency to try to make everybody feel like, hey, we've got it under control.
Yeah, that awareness is really important when it comes to effective communication for a number of fronts. One, to be able to learn about how your style may be affecting other people or landing with other people. But to your point, to know where, my tendency is to do this. For me, my tendency is to solve problems. So I just immediately want to jump in and try and come up with a solution. And for years, that hindered my ability to effectively listen to people. I would hear something, I would latch onto it, and I would want to jump in. So now I've had to try to really reel that back and focus in on just pause, wait, really take it in, understand, do I have a solution for the actual problem or maybe a symptom of the problem because I wasn't fully listening? Or
Right.
even sometimes, does this person want my advice? Are they just getting it out? Right. You can start to understand when you really do focus in on other people what they're looking for. So I think having that awareness really is key. And I think about in my past roles at a different organization, much larger organization, we would go through change quite a bit in the sales and business development, moving from division to division, changes in strategy, reduction in force, restaffing, all these types of things. And for me, whenever I would head out to like a senior leadership meeting, when I would come back, one of the very first things I would do was either to get my team together, whether it's on a phone call, a Zoom meeting, or even in person if possible, and share what I knew. It's like, here's
Mhm.
what I know, here's what I don't know, but and really level set because when you don't provide that communication, you know what happens? People start creating things on their own. They fill in the blanks on their own, which can be very dangerous, especially during times of change.
That's true. And that reminds me that one of the tasks of a leader, especially in a large organization, a matrixed organization, one of the tasks is owning and communicating change. Change is leadership, right? We're going somewhere. That's why a leader is necessary because we're going in a direction, and and somebody needs to lead. When you work for a large organization, even as a leader, you don't get to make all of the decisions. And sometimes decisions are passed through you. And there's that challenge of I have to absorb what change is taking place. I have to process it myself. And then I have to own that change as a leader for my team. It's way too easy as a leader who receives a change, a delegation from somewhere else in the organization. It's way too easy for me to say, well, I didn't make this decision, but this is what the corporate guys want us to do. And, this is what the big boss wants us to do. So we have to do it and throw my hands up. I don't agree with the decision either. To me, that only sows seeds of distrust with the team.
Mm-hmm.
And while my immediate reaction is, this will save me some points with my team because I don't have to be the bad guy here. I think it creates this atmosphere of distrust. And also it doesn't give our team the opportunity to practice our resilience and adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that's coming out of the pandemic is that adaptability and agility are so important, vital to teams and organizations, that if we're not practicing, we're not exercising those muscles, we're not going to move forward. So owning that change and being willing to communicate it, just like you said, in a large organization, it may not always be my decision to communicate, but I do have to communicate a decision.
You said something in there very powerful. I want to call it out so that the listeners really catch on to it, is that businesses are going somewhere. That's why they need leaders, right? To lead people in the direction. If business were stagnating, not innovating, not changing, you're right. You don't need leaders. You're not taking people anywhere. And if I think of the difference between, say, a leader and a manager, if you imagine going on a hike in the woods, a manager is going to focus on just kind of keeping people together, keeping people, moving at the same pace, maybe moving in the same direction, that you're not losing anybody. The leader is the one charting the course, figuring out here's the best way for us to get out of here. Here's why, and really motivating people to want to go along with them. So I think there's a huge distinction there when you think about the difference between a manager and a leader. And a big part of that, especially as a leader, is understanding the why and communicating the why. Here's why we're doing this. If you don't do that, to your point, I think that's where people will fall into, I don't know, the boss said we have to do this, and then it kind of trickles down throughout
That's
the
a very poor
organization.
why. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you have that why, and then here's how we fit into this, here's how we help accomplish why, that's a great way to really get the buy-in from your team.
I'm reminded that I really like the analogy of a hike through the woods that you mentioned. If we think about management, great management of resources in a situation like a hike or an Everest climb, for example, a great manager will say, here are the resources that we have, including people's energy, water, food, shelter, those kinds of things. If a manager truly manages that process well, they will come to the decision that it's best for us to stay at base camp or go home, because that's where the resources are. We will be safest. We won't lose anybody on the hike. We can conserve our energy by kicking our feet up and watching TV. We can have all the rations that we want by ordering from Grubhub, whatever it is. So a manager will make the decision, we're not going to hike this mountain at all. But I like the idea of presenting the why, presenting the challenge. In healthcare, could we operate hospitals by staying exactly the same? We could. There are some, foundational practices of excellence in healthcare, and many people within healthcare are motivated to keep things exactly the same way. It benefits them financially, things are working for them, and they're not motivated to move forward. So the challenge for organizations like mine is, how can leaders inspire others that there is something better beyond? It is worthwhile to hike that mountain, and it may be different from situation to situation. And of course, when you climb that summit, You're going to spend your energy. There may be some casualty along the way even, but that climb is going to be worthwhile when you hit the summit.
Love it. Oh, fantastic. So shifting gears a little bit, yeah, Mike, with the work that you're doing there, specifically around leadership and the Leadership Institute, what are really the key essential communication skills that you're focused on making sure that the leaders there have in order to thrive and help the organization get to the mountaintop, so to speak?
I mentioned that one of the critical and foundational leadership competencies is executive presence and the ability to present well. I find that a lot of our senior leaders in my organization are evaluated based on formally and informally, based on their ability to present. And I don't think that's completely fair, but
Mm-hmm.
if you just look at the reality, when do you have the opportunity to show up in front of your bosses? It might be during a review. It might be in a board meeting. There are critical junctures where you have the opportunity to show up, present well in front of a boss, and it's usually in those kinds of environments.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are not presenting yourself well and or being received well, then you've already shot yourself in the foot. You've already lost a lot of your executive presence right there. So I think that's a critical one. And one of the other ones that's creeping up for us when it comes to the communication style is the ability to uh, tell a story in a concise way. Can you tell the story of what's happening on your campus or what's happening in your department in a concise, brief way? And many people don't possess that skill, but it is a skill that's worth building.
Yeah, I think when we think about those two skills, they really very much are intertwined. Being an effective presenter, having that presence and the ability to tell concise stories. And a lot of times when people think of presenting, right, they're thinking of you're on the stage or delivering a keynote. But for me, any type of interaction really is a presentation. So if you're having a one-on-one with your boss and maybe you're trying to get approval for a new project, funding for a new initiative, to me, that's a presentation. And all the skills that you're using up on a big stage can translate over into that type of conversation. And that's ultimately really where stories come into play, especially if you are in an industry that's data heavy. You're evaluating lots of data, and you need to get people to be able to connect the dots and kind of really understand, right? We have all this data. How do we turn it into information? What does it mean? And using stories is a absolutely fantastic way for people that may not be in the weeds, so to speak, with where all this information is coming from, or all this data is coming from. Using a story is usually a great way to be able to connect that for people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's vital. And that skill also means taking, as you said, taking data that are available or taking many different parts in the picture and weaving one concise story. It's a skill and it takes some practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we make a mistake in assuming that you either have it or you don't. And certainly there are people that are just born with a better a great style of communication, either one-on-one, group settings, ability to present to a board or present a keynote to 1,000 people. There are people that just have some natural talent there,
Mm-hmm.
but also people can improve in those areas. And I know your organization cares very much about that,
Mm-hmm.
and we do too. We have a leadership institute here because we believe that presentation skills, emotional intelligence, uh, communicating, providing feedback, all of these things are skills. If it was either you have it or you don't, then we wouldn't exist because there's no point. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not worth practicing. But telling a
Exactly.
concise story, communicating to groups or one-on-one, those are skills and they're worth practicing.
Yeah, and they take lots of practice. Fortunately, they are learnable, teachable skills, right? I wouldn't have a job if they weren't.
Right.
Um, but like I said, it takes practice, especially starting from a young age. I talk about this a lot with my kids. They're a little bit older now. They're 12 and 15, I believe. Make sure I get that right. 12 and 15, or I won't hear the end of it. 12 and 15, but from a very early age, they got those reps to be able to interact with people, whether it's kids their own age, adults, whether it was at school or preschool or going to the park, going to the library, ordering at restaurants, talking to their doctors. We would give them those opportunities. And to the point now where both of my kids, they're very comfortable to different levels and different extents talking to people, just being able to have an adult, mature conversation because they've practiced it for so long. Then as you have those skills, then you start to come in and refine. What are the very specific things for how do you tell a concise story, or how do you use data and turn it into a story, or how do you work with visuals in a presentation, the more technical aspects of it. But yeah, it just takes those revolutions, those reps in order to continue to improve.
Scott, if I mentioned Edwin Freeman's term earlier of a non-anxious presence, and if I was to give somebody that feedback, that you need to have a non-anxious presence, or feedback that people often, including in my organization, people often receive is you need to work on your executive presence.
Mm-hmm.
When we give somebody that very general feedback, they don't, it's not actionable. They don't know what they can do about it, or they might look into it and say, what does it take to build some executive
Mm-hmm.
presence, which is an appropriate response. But by being more specific, and this is where I've appreciated Communispond's work, is when I say a non-anxious presence, that might show up for you as somebody's got their hands in their pockets while they're speaking at board meeting, or you can see somebody is fidgeting while they're handling a crucial conversation. Their patterns of speech, the speed in which they speak, all of those things are a part of what makes somebody appear anxious in front of someone else. And we might say that person was nervous, but to be even more specific is critical as leaders if we want people to build those skills. What is it exactly? Can we pinpoint the skill that needs to be enhanced here?
I absolutely love that. Yeah, we hear a lot from our clients. Okay, we want this person. We want to develop their executive presence. It's like, okay, well, it's a very broad term. What
Right.
does executive presence mean to you? Or to your point, this person comes across as nervous. All right, well, what does that mean? They're fidgeting. They're shuffling around. Maybe they say every other word, or they talk really fast when they get in front of a group. So as you start to get very specific about it, you can isolate what are the challenges, and then there are absolutely skills or things that you can learn to help alleviate or overcome some of those very specific challenges.
Definitely.
Michael, if you had to think about your career and your success, and if I held you to and I said, what's the one key communication skill that really helped you to get to where you are today? If you had to say, what's the top one, what would that be?
I'm going to say making connections with people, and I'll elaborate a little bit. I think that when you're communicating one-on-one with someone, or if you're presenting to a larger group, it's all about making connections. I think that is that next level skill that we want presenters to have is
Mm-hmm.
sure, you can present your content well. You can make sure you're making great eye contact. You can have that non-anxious presence, but then that next level is making a connection with people. And if I was to put suggest a trait that I know that I have worked on myself, it's making real connections with people. So sometimes it's executive presence, but sometimes, Scott, it's that when I'm in a one-on-one situation, can I make myself fully present with that person and help them to feel that I truly care, that I'm truly interested in what they have to say, and or am I just listening long enough till I can interject what I really wanted to say in the first place? I think that's a critical skill, and I think that's something that, because of my intentionality around that, has benefited me in my career.
And it's very nuanced, some of these small things that you can do to forge strong connections with people. And once again, something minor that you just did that I want to point out is when I asked you that question, you took a little bit of an extra long beat there, maybe 2, 3 seconds. And I'm like, wait, did we freeze up? But no, you took the time to actually think about that. And then to me, that's it. Oh, wow, he's really enjoying this. He's taking this seriously. He's locked in to this discussion. So sometimes it is, as you mentioned, pausing, giving some time, and not just trying to be jumping right in. You can tell when you're talking to someone like that, they're leaning forward, they're almost coming out of their chair because they can't wait for you to shut your mouth so that they can start talking. Versus if you just, and it feels uncomfortable first, take that couple second pause before you respond to someone. It's one of the best ways you can make connections because it signals that you really were listening and processing what they said.
We're on the same page with that. I Can I double click on what you said there? I love that you called out the pause. I'm glad I paused for that reason. My internet connection is stable, but
Okay, good.
one this is one that when we talk about executive presence, we assume that when we pause in a presentation or when we're talking to people, we assume as speakers that when we pause, people will think, they'll interpret that pause as, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're not knowledgeable about this topic. They're going to just make something up. Actually, I think it's the opposite. When you pause, just like you said, I think you're telling me you value giving me a good answer. You value putting together some phrasing that will make sense to me, and I'm going to appreciate it as a listener. If I may, I've heard that Martin Luther King Jr. would start his presentations, many times sermons at his church, with 10 seconds of silence. That's how he would begin. He walks up to the pulpit in the church, puts his Bible or notes down, takes a look around for 10 seconds. It sounds agonizing as a presenter, but does anybody in the room at that moment think, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he probably has no idea what he's going to say. He might not be knowledgeable about what he's going to talk about. Of course not. Of course not. They're waiting with anticipation. And when he says his first word, everybody is paying attention and is just locked in, and he knows what his first line is going to be.
It's amazing that one of the most powerful things in communication is actually not talking. You're communicating when
Right.
you're pausing, but actually not speaking is one of the most powerful things that you can do. It pulls your audience in. It helps to calm you down. It signals to them that maybe you're listening. It gives them an opportunity to process. There's so many benefits to pausing in your communication that for me, it's just fascinating to think about. And it's typically people are just rushing through things, rushing through life, rushing through their conversations, rushing through meetings. Slow down, pause. It'll have a big impact on your communications.
Definitely.
Michael, early on, you touched on a leader that really had a profound impact on you going down this trajectory of leadership development. If you think back through your life and through your career, is there somebody that's had an influence on your communication style and maybe something that you took from them and put into your tool belt?
I have two people that come to mind for two different reasons. One was a pastor I worked with when I was a pastor, and he was a sought after preacher, a very well-known figure for 40 plus years in his community, and had a wide audience online. His presentation style, he was about as well-read an individual as professorial and intelligent as you'd ever want from a preacher, but he had to reach an audience. He was on a university campus where he pastored, so he had to reach an audience of college freshmen. And Scott, you have teenagers, and I do too. So I'll just say that that's a certain level of
Yeah.
listener. And then he also had PhD professors on his campus. And so he's trying to reach this wide range of people. So you can't be so, come across so verbose and so come across as such a smarty pants that you leave out those that aren't on that level. And you can't dumb down your message so that, PhDs will just tune you out. He walked that balance so well, and he did it authentically. He did a lot of reading and research, and he internalized it and was able to communicate that message simply and clearly. And he did it week after week after week for 40 something years. And then I have another leader that I respected very much for his ability to, in a corporate setting, especially in a boardroom, his ability to take in perspectives and know exactly the right time to come in with his own perspective. That is a skill I wish I had more of. And I observed that, and I took notes, actual notes of when he spoke, because there were a couple times that I thought this was genius. Everyone in the room has shared their thoughts, and he shares his without coming across as, oh, I already had my mind made up anyway. But he had very insightful things to say, and he chose the right time to speak and the right time to listen.
Across both of those individuals, two things jump out to me. It's the idea of adaptability and awareness, right? Being aware of your audience, being aware of the timing, and especially as a leader, if you are in a meeting, for example, if you're the most senior person in there and you're trying to get people's feedback on a project, an initiative, whatever it is, if you, two scenarios, right? I'm the senior leader. I immediately kick the meeting off. Okay, here's what's at stake today. Here are my thoughts, A, B, C, D, and E. What do you all think? Versus here's where we are today. What do you all think? Okay, here's my thoughts. In which scenario are you going to get honest feedback and your team's honest approach, right? When you give your thoughts at the end versus coloring it and putting people in a position where they might not feel comfortable disagreeing with you. Now, hopefully you've established a culture where people do feel comfortable with that. But if you want people's true insights and opinions, I think I don't know if it's Simon Sinek or one of these leadership guys talk about the leader really should speak last in a meeting to make sure that you are getting people's unbiased opinions and not just coming along and agreeing with you.
And what kind of culture does that establish when a leader comes in with their mind made up? If you're my senior leader and I come to a meeting and you've already got your mind made up and my opinion doesn't really matter that much, next time I probably won't even show up very well prepared for the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever really do need my perspective, I won't have even practiced the skill of being able to elaborate, to communicate on that perspective. Now, you set
It's
up
one
a
of the
culture where, it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. They shut down
yes.
that.
If
Yeah.
you want to crush growth and innovation at your company, have your leaders come in with their mind made up and not really pay attention or listen to the folks on their team. Couldn't
Right.
agree more. Michael, as we wrap up here, what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this, really just in general around the importance of the skills that we talked about today and the impact it can have on their lives?
We have this cultural thing where we don't want to be judged by people. I want to be myself. I don't want anybody to judge me for who I am. And we take that into our communication with others, especially in the professional world, and assume that nobody can judge me for who I am. The reality, unfortunate or not, is that people are judging us constantly, 100% of the time, in every interaction. In a keynote or in a one-on-one, we're being judged. I think that's a hurdle we just kind of have to get over.
Mhm.
Now, of course, I also think we ought not judge people harshly, and we ought to give people the benefit of the doubt and give them an A and encourage people to improve and see the potential in people, of course. But also, if I'm going to step in front of a group of people, my tendency, because I don't want to be judged, might be that I will make everything more casual than the situation calls for. I have seen this so often in professional presentation settings where somebody tries to play down the atmosphere and say, hey, we're all friends here. And that might be what somebody tries to communicate when they put their hands in their pockets or just fold their arms. We're relaxed here. It's cool. Meanwhile, my boss's boss's boss is sitting over here.
Mhm.
This isn't the time to be cool. This is the time to step up and show the executive presence that you've got. And sometimes we shy away from that polish because we don't want to be judged on that level when that's happening whether we like it or not. That sounds really harsh, especially for young leaders, but I think that's something that we ought to approach situations as, what can I gain here in people's recognition, acknowledgement of the polish and presence that I bring, versus I don't want to mess anything up. And I just think that's a critical frame of mind that we have to achieve as leaders in every situation.
I always take the approach of I go into every situation or any interaction as an opportunity to learn. I'm going to learn something, whether it goes well or it goes poorly. I'm going to learn from that. But I like what you said. They're also going into every interaction, especially if you're a professional and you're looking to grow within your organization, thinking about every interaction you have, a phone call, an email, a one-on-one meeting, leading a presentation in front of your boss's boss's boss. Every single thing that you do is an opportunity to shine. It's an opportunity for people to see you, to see your growth, and it's going to position you very well for future opportunities because people are seeing that consistently. I went from my past company, I went from individual contributor to I was leading the corporate sales group when I left, coming out of a teaching background. I was not a sales professional. I did not always have the highest sales number, but I showed up every single time. And people recognize that I was doing the right things all the time. Even when people weren't looking, I was doing the right things. People pick up on that and they see those trends and they see those patterns, and you stand out, and you're going to stand out above sometimes even from someone that may be a better contributor than you, right? From a numbers perspective or a skill perspective, but they see that potential and they see the commitment. So spot on.
Yeah, and that leadership potential someone might see in you, you're right, might not be related to the current role that you have, but when you show up in that way and show that I have more capacity for leadership development, the opportunities will come.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And if people want to connect with you, learn a little bit more about the great work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, we're doing great work in the Leadership Institute at AdventHealth. Proud of this team. And they're welcome to reach out to me at michael.paradise@adventhealth.com. And Scott, I also released a book through Advent Source called The Way of Wisdom. That's a biblical mentoring stories for leaders journey, and people are welcome to pick that up as well.
Perfect. I will put both of those in the show notes, how they can access those. So if you're listening, you want to check it out, be sure to look at the show notes. Michael, thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Scott.
A special thanks again to my guest, Michael Paradise. I hope you found his insights on leadership and communication as valuable as I did. As we close this episode, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.